recording after the fact. And then this, we'll just consider this a demo. So I ain't shooting miss, or I ain't shooting mister, depending on what platform you find me on. I'll have all the links available for you guys in just a moment on my GitHub. And this is the Introduction to SysInternals class. Um, Really quick class that we threw together just to show you guys what SysInternals is, show you how to use it, hopefully, in a way that makes your day job easier or your night job, depending on what you're doing, um, and makes you look like an InfoSec rock star. Um, and I'm being facetious. You don't have to be a rock star to be an InfoSec. You can find me on Twitter uh, at I ain't shooting mister with files at threatening auras as my little handle there. A cool picture of me at Yellowstone. And then you can find everything for tonight's training in the SysInternals training on my GitHub. So there's going to be a couple of files out there. There's going to be the PDF that I'm working from tonight, which has the slides, and it's got all the links and everything in it. And then an ODP, which is an open source PowerPoint file with all the graphics and things in it as well. So just to tell you what's going on tonight, this is about a 45-minute class. We're going to go through 5 different Sysmon tools and or SysInternals tools. Talk about what they are, just to give you a basic idea so that you know. And then 2 of them we're going to dig really deeply into, and that's going to be Sysmon, which we've done a lot of work on our configuration, but we've borrowed very heavily from Swift on security. So we thank them. And then also A.D. Bertram for his published work on Adam the Automator blog for how to use Procmon and how to use it to the best of its abilities. So if you need to get there, I'll put the links here in the chat for you so that you can get to those files. And then we'll get to that Sysmon config in just a minute. So let's get back to the slides here. So what is Sysmon, or SysInternals? SysInternals was created in 1996 by a gentleman by the name of Mark Russinovich. Mark is currently the CTO for Azure. So if you want to know how to get a cushy job at Microsoft, 30 years ago you needed to create a set of SysInternal tools and then just continue to be awesome for the rest of your life. And you can go be the CTO of Azure. They ended up purchasing the tools from him in 2006 and making them part of the actual Microsoft stack and continue to develop them, and then have released some really neat and new updates as they went into Windows 10 and started to unify the kernel and all that kind of stuff. It's a set of tools, though, that lets you manage, diagnose, troubleshoot, and monitor Windows environments. So if you've done anything with us for Linux, you know that Linux has a lot of commands like LSOF or LSBlock or LSUSB or HTOP or NTOP or just regular top, all these different utilities that exist that allow you to see into the file system, to see into the kernel, to see exactly what's being opened, what's being closed, what memory handles there are, how much free disk space there is, all those great things. This is going to give you those same kinds of tools, but on Windows. And as I mentioned earlier, there's 5 tools that you should know and 2 that we're going to get into in depth. So those 5 are going to be PS Exec, Proc Dump or Process Dump, Process Explorer or Proc Explorer, Sysmon, and Procmon. And so let's go through each of these really quickly. There's a couple of ways to get these tools, though. One way that you should be using, one way that, in my opinion, you shouldn't be using. We'll talk about those, though. You can download the SysInternals Suite. You can go to sysinternals.com. If you go to sysinternals.com, you can download the whole package. There's a ton of utilities in there that we're not going to talk about. I think the total number of utilities is 30 or 40. There's 32-bit versions and 64-bit versions, but there's 5 that are really important. You can get those, put them on a jump drive, and then you can run them on any Windows platform. You do usually have to have admin to get the full benefit of the tools, but they still do a lot of cool stuff. Or you can run them from live.sysinternals.com. This is a really quick way to get them, a really easy way if you don't have a jump drive with you to carry them around. It's also a really great way for attackers to get these files onto your systems. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but as I mentioned, this lets you see all those memory handles, lets you see everything that a process is doing, the files it has open, lets you dump out memory to disk, and so all things that you might not want an attacker doing on your systems. And so while it allows you to download the individual files on the fly, I would recommend that you don't host these on an open file share. I'd recommend you monitor DNS and alert when you see somebody going out to live sysinternals, especially if that person's not in your information security or information technology area at work. You can also set up alerts and on the program executions within Sysmon, and we're going to talk about Sysmon a little bit here. And then you can also block the execution of these completely using App Locker. All things that you should consider doing for these tools in your environment. And you might think, what? These are great tools. You just said these are great. Microsoft bought them. I should be using them. We're here. We're going to learn about them. That's true. You should learn them. But any hacker or attacker or any person who's worth their salt who's trying to overcome a security control on a system is going to stick with things that the admins are likely using. If you go and ask anybody what their number one favorite hacking tool is for Windows systems, they're probably going to tell you PowerShell, followed probably by Active Directory users and groups or users and computers, depending on what they're trying to do. Because those are built in and they work 99% of the time, they work 100% of the time, right? So PS Exec, this was a really great one. This is one of the things that really propelled sysinternals into everybody's vocabulary and made everybody super excited. It was originally a replacement for Telnet, and it allowed you to do remote command execution on other Windows-based computers as long as you had credentials for those computers. And so it used NTLM, which we know now that NTLM isn't secure, um, but it would pass that command over to the other computer along with the NTLM hash and say, hey, I'm Bob. Bob has rights to do this on this computer. Please do this thing on the computer. And the thing would do it. And it was really great because now instead of having to manage computers individually, you could send out a command to 100 computers that Bob had access to and have them all complete the commands across an enterprise or across a deployment of machines. A couple of things wrong with this. One, it's passing the NTLM credential hash, which we now know is a bad idea. Two, it stores those credentials in the SAM database on every computer that's being accessed. And so when you think about that, you think like that's not a big deal. But if I'm an attacker, I really am going to want to find that domain admin credential. And if the domain admin's doing stuff to my box and his credentials being saved on my box, it means that I'm that much closer to being able to get a copy of his hash. Now, I'm not going to go into why NTLM is bad. But essentially, you can steal parts of the NTLM handshake and then use them without even knowing the password for the person. So you don't have to get Bob's password. You just have to get a copy of his hash of his password, and then you can get things to execute. So this sounds really great, but don't do it. It's completely deprecated. Microsoft has written a completely new set of PowerShell utilities to use for this. They're linked in the slides. You should be using something called PowerShell Remoting. It makes use of the Windows remote procedure calls, the ports, and protocols, and you'll be able to do everything that you could do with PS Exec, but you can do it through PowerShell, and it'll all be done securely because it runs off of Kerberos instead of using NTLM and passing the hashes around. I'm not going to get into what Kerberos is, but for day one, InfoSec 101, know that NTLM bad, Kerberos good. And so in this case, we don't want to use the NTLM thing. We want to use the Kerberos thing. Next is going to be Proc Dump. Proc Dump is the process dumper. It's really cool. It allows you to take and make memory dumps of different programs, especially when they lock up or they spike, have CPU spikes. And you might think this is great. Then I can troubleshoot and find out instead of just getting that, Word is not responding. I could do a memory dump and find out exactly why Word's not responding or why it keeps eating up my Excel spreadsheets or, whatever's going on in Windows. And yeah, that's a great idea, and that's exactly what you should be using it for. And we're not going to cover it today, but you should also know that attackers are going to use it. Because remember, this is one of those things that as IT and InfoSec people, we expect to see in our environment. We probably have permissions set around for people to be able to execute these kind of programs in our environment so that they can troubleshoot. And so there's a really easy walkthrough on the MITRE ATT&CK framework, if you're not familiar, for OS credential dumping, where they go out and grab a copy of the LSAS and use Proc Dump to dump it from memory onto disk, which means they're able to take that password that's hanging out in memory out there, actually write it to disk, take it home with them. They can crack it later. So they don't have to get your password right then. They just have to get a copy of your password so that they can go home and work on it. So Proc Dump is one of those things, again, that we should be looking for to report on for when it's in use in our environment, especially if we know that our IT guys aren't using it a lot. or maybe there's only certain groups of people who should be doing this kind of work. And a real quick plug for the MITRE ATT&CK framework. If you're not familiar with the MITRE ATT&CK framework, MITRE does a great job of putting together strings of attacks to explain how you need to defend your systems from an attacker's point of view, going from how they do initial surveillance of your systems and how they gather information about it using OSINT, and then how they get their initial foothold, how they maintain persistence, how they collect data, and eventually how they exfil data and possibly ransomware you, depending on what kind of attack you're suffering. So the MITRE ATT&CK goes through and actually shows you ways to defend against all these things, um, specifically. So it's not just generic like, oh yeah, you should protect your passwords. It says, hey, on Windows systems, you can do these things to protect yourself. Let's see here. Process Explorer. This is kind of like LSOF. If you've seen LSOF on Linux, it'll show you all the open file locks that you currently have. It'll show you any process that has a file locked up. So if you go to edit something and it says, hey, you can't use this file because it's in use by another process, and you're like, great, Windows, what process? And Windows goes, I don't know, but you can't have it. And you're like, I literally don't have this file open anywhere. Um, and then you realize that you left your terminal open and your terminal was CD'd into that directory, and that's why you can't get into it, and you've been banging your head against it for like 15 minutes trying to figure out why. You can just open up Process Explorer. Process Explorer is going to show you all the memory handles that are currently open, all the file locks that are currently open, all the directories that are currently open, and the parent processes of any of those things. So if you've ever seen a service host running and you're like, well, what the hell service host? I didn't run anything called service host. Service host probably has a parent process, something that started it, and you can go into Process Explorer and find out. Process Explorer will do a ton of powerful searches. One of the cool things that I learned today that I didn't even know you could do with it is if you go into Process Explorer and you right click on something and choose the properties, you could go in and see what security token it was actually running over. So if you know what security tokens are in Windows, it's how the computer knows whether or not to let you do certain actions. If you ever get that little pop-up box that says, hey, do you want to allow this thing to make changes on your machine? If you say yes, then that thing's granted the administrator security token so that it can go and make certain types of changes. Process Explorer can actually show you what permissions are being inherited, what tokens it does have, what tokens it doesn't have, and all that great thing, and what tokens it expects to have. So if something's not working and you're like, why is my program broken? Maybe you're supposed to run it as admin. You could go in there and look. There's two modes for it. It does DLL mode and handle mode. I won't get into those. There's links in the documentation if you want to go in and look at it more and see what's available there. This one is a big one. This is System Monitor, and this thing is crazy. I'm going to go through the configuration for it in just a second. I'm going to give you guys just a really quick run through of the configuration because the number of things that this thing can do is legitimately crazy. And we're going to look at Procmon, and once you see Sysmon and then you see Procmon, and then we go back and look at Sysmon for a second, you'll start to see how these two tools work together and why we're talking about them together. But Sysmon is this persistent forensics logging software. So it actually sits down at the kernel level when you run it. It looks at everything that's coming through, and then it has a set of rules and um, uh, we'll just say rules. So it's got a set of rules and configurations that it's looking for that says like, hey, if the command line contains this, or if these files are being launched from this location, or if this is trying to do this kind of thing, or if it should be doing this kind of thing, and it usually does this kind of thing, but it's not doing this thing this time, then maybe we need to stop it. Sysmon can see all those things. And when it sees those things, it can take actions against those things, like logging them so that then you can go and alert against them. So I'm going to show you guys how to set it up tonight on your personal computer. You can then go out and follow any number of guides from Microsoft and others on how to deploy it for your enterprise. You should be collecting this data. I'm not even going to say that it's a matter of opinion. Best practice is you should be deploying Sysmon in your Windows environment. You should be collecting some kind of logs. And if you have threat hunting teams or you're a one-man threat hunting team, you should be taking action based on those logs. Somebody should be looking at these and finding out. It's going to be um, the single richest place to gain information about what's going on in your Windows environment without having to spend any money. And it does all kinds of cool things. You can push these logs out to a Splunk or a Seam or another Graylog or Elk Stacks or anything like that. collect them all up, and then do all kinds of awesome data visualizations on them, figure out what's going on in your environment, what's normal, what's not, and then begin to actually have insight without paying a dime. So there's going to be some storage costs depending on how much data you collect. And I will give that caveat. If you didn't do a great job with your config, you could get inundated with events, especially if you put this on like 1,000 machines without piloting it first. So try out your config on smaller boxes that you're active on, figure out what kind of data collection numbers you're seeing, and then do that math and work it out and figure out what would happen if you put this on 1,000 machines or 10,000 machines. Um, there's 25 unique type of events. We're going to look at them all in just a moment. And they include the parent EXEs, where the file locations are, the contents of command lines, what ports and what destinations network try to connect to, DNS queries that are sent through, and you could go and build the config that I'm fixing to show you all by yourself. And everybody would think you were super cool if you went and did that. However, if you don't hate yourself, you can go out and do what I did, which is go to Swift on Security, who I mentioned earlier. Go out to Swift on Security's GitHub page, look for their Sysmon config, take a look at it. They've got a ton of stuff in there that knocks out a lot of noise, but also brings in some really important stuff. And then me and some buddies have worked on that original configuration that Swift carries and put in a bunch of additional stuff. Some things that were pending in Swift's pull requests, and then some stuff that we found other places on the internet. We think we have a really good config put together. We'd love for you to try it out and give some feedback on it. So it's linked there as well. And again, you can find it in the GitHub for this class. So let's take a look at this configuration really quickly. And I say quickly, but looking at this configuration is anything but quick. Let me get this down here. OBS is betraying me with whatever that. With whatever window it's showing here. Let's try this again. IR use computer goods sometimes. There we go. Looks like we get some other people joining in the chat. Can you guys see this configuration? Is it fairly clear? Is the stuff itty bitty? I got a really hard and I got a looks good. Somebody. Oh, okay. Well, okay, great. Yeah, you keep driving then. You don't look at the screen, okay? Everything that I'm showing is available in the slides and is available in the repo for the class. So don't worry if you're missing something that you're not getting to see right now. You'll get to see it if you go back and look at the stuff here. I've got links in the configuration for Swift, so if you want to go and find Swift's original config, you can find that. I do have this license. The license on this is patch and monitor your stuff without the expletive, right? So I don't care what you do with this config. I got this config for free because other people built this config, and then I put stuff into this config, and others put stuff into this config, and we really just want you to walk away with Sysmon running with a config, right? And you understanding what Sysmon's doing and being able to take and have some actionable intelligence off of this, of what's going on in your environment. So take it, do whatever you want with it, fork it, sell it. Don't do that. We'll call you a dirty bastard and we'll blacklist you. But do take it and do something with it. So we go through the config. It's a basic XML file. It's going to do a lot of things here, like talk about the kind of hashing algorithms that it should pay attention to. You can always go in and change this and just drop an asterisk in there if you want to just grab everything. But it's going to hit 25 different types of events we talked about. And I'm going to go through those real quick. The first one is process creation. So it's going to look and say, hey, a new process has been spun up on this Windows box. Who spun it up? Where did it get spun up from? What was the command that it was spun up with, and did the person, is this something that we expect, right, with the way the config is today? There's all kinds of things you can use to report off of. You can say the command line can begin with this, or the command line can contain this, or the command line is explicitly this thing, or the exe that was launched called an image is specifically this thing or is not this thing. There's 100 different ways you can hash it here. One of the things that you need to know and remember about these rules, though, is an exclude will always beat an include. So if you write two rules and you say always include A, and you write another rule and say always exclude A, the exclusion's always gonna win out. Um, these rules are also or rules, the way they're written today. You could go in and write them as and rules if you hate yourself. Um, feel free to try that. You would only get like 2 rules per section, so I really don't recommend it. With these or rules, you lose some granularity, but it allows you to cover a lot more ground. So think of it like we're an inch deep and a mile wide at this point using the or rules. These are all of our exclusions for process creates. These are all things that we know Windows does. Every Windows machine does it. It does it tons of times a day. I do not want these in my logs. In fact, if you didn't have this section in here and you turned on Sysmon, your whole box might fall over because it just fill up the disk with events, and then you'd have to go in and boot into safe mode and delete out the events. Second section is going to be file creation times that have been retroactively changed. So this means a file's been put down on disk, and then for some reason that file gets its properties changed, and it gets those properties updated to a new date and time. And this could be something that attackers are doing to screw with the system, resetting licenses, who knows what else is going on there. It's worth paying attention to. There's a few things that do this by default. Updaters will do this, installers will do this, because sometimes they'll copy off a file and then they'll update the date to a new creation time that matches the actual creation time, even though they were pulling from an image. And things like OneDrive and other Google Drive and other things that integrate with the desktop, you may see that as well there. Event ID 3 is network connections that have been initiated. So this is going to be what exe did it, what direction was it going, what destination was it going to, what ports was it calling out on. We've actually included something here called lull bins, and these are here in the living off the land binary section. Lull bins are going to be things that come with Windows that you don't expect to download anything, essentially. There's security researchers who do a lot of work to go out and find the lull bins, or these binaries that come with Windows that don't publish and say they um, accept arguments, right, when they're called from the command line. But if they're called from the command line and passed a URL, they'll go and download whatever the thing is. They'll go and download whatever thing. So you might be thinking like, oh, we've done everything we should do in our security softwares. We've blocked things from being downloaded. And then something pops up in the System32 file like find string, which you would have never thought would be out downloading stuff, and find string can actually navigate UNC paths and go to hosted shares and different files and all that kind of crazy stuff. So you should probably be paying attention to those things if they're downloading. We want to know about it. So those are the kind of things that are included here. There's a bunch of other ones, things like netcat, things like Tor, VNC, Nmap. Of course, if you're using these in your environment, you probably want to mask these out. Um, but you're going to have to weigh that, right? You're going to have to consider, do I want to lose the forensics data by masking this out because we use it and then miss out if an attacker uses it against us? Or do I want to leave it in there and then have to deal with cutting it out of the logs later as I collect this information? And then it goes into a list of protocols, common proxy ports, common Tor ports, and then there's some inclusions for things that we always want to include. We always want to know if this happens. I've thrown a few in here that I know I have problems with on my network. We use Resilio Sync. We're huge fans of Signal Beta, and we use code. And because of the file locations that Resilio, Signal, and code run from, which are non-standard file locations, they always show up and populate my logs. So we've went in and knocked those out. If you don't use Resilio, Signal, and code in your environment, of course, pull these back out. 4 is reserved, so don't worry about it. 5 is going to be if a process ends. This one may create a lot of noise, and you may want to cut it out completely. It's got a few things in here to try and show you when things have happened across a remote file share or out of a place that they usually shouldn't be. And so take a look at those. It may be worth leaving them on in your environment. The cool thing about Sysmon is because it can work off of so many different unique event types and so many different uh, properties within those events, like the image, the command line, where it was, the file location, who started it, who closed it, all that kind of stuff. It's all like building blocks. You can just put it together like Legos and make it whatever you want and whatever fits for your environment without having to worry about, um, what's right. There is no right for this. What's right is whatever works in your environment, whatever you customize and tailor it to. 6 is going to be drivers being loaded into the kernel. 7 is going to be DLLs loaded. 8 is going to be remote thread created. Remote threads being created can actually show you where something's being hollowed out. If you're not familiar with process hollowing, go and check that out. It's essentially where one process begins injecting code into another process. This can be used a lot by different viruses, malware, those kind of things, to take a legitimate process and try and inject code into the kernel so that the kernel says, oh, this came from Windows Defender, but it actually came from I'm going to brick your PC.exe or whatever. Another one here for raw disk access. So if something circumvents the file system and tries to write to the magnetic disk or SSD directly, it'll be recorded. Interprocess access, you won't see that one come up very often, or in my experience, you haven't. Um, there's notes in here that this one can cause some high system load, so it may be worth knocking out if you don't find anything in there that's useful to you guys. File creations. This can be really good because lots of times when a dropper gets on your system from a malware, it's going to take and download things that you don't usually have around on your system. So you might think, like me, myself, I don't use batch files a lot. So if a batch file popped up in my C drive that wasn't from me, I probably want to know about it. And so these are the kinds of things it's going to look for. You can go in and copy paste any of these. Just grab any line in this config, change it to another um, extension that you know that you want to watch out for and add it in or delete out any of them. We've got a lot of stuff in here. There's JavaScript, there's ASP, aspects, PS1s, VBS, all kinds of stuff that are usually not around for a standard user. Standard users probably not creating these things most of the time. And so if you see Susan in accounting, who is 68 and a half, getting ready to hit that retirement, and you see all of a sudden that her box starts spinning up a bunch of PS1s, a bunch of jar files, might be time to go and check out that box, see if we need to start some incident response there. And then here is the holy grail of ransomware files. At this point, if you see these files, you're probably already screwed, but you may be able to get a good time frame of when and how badly. These are all gathered up by S. Duff. He's on GitHub. You can go and check out his work. He had this as a pull request pending against Swift on securities. These are all these different extensions and things that different ransomware and cryptojackers use when they encrypt your files. And so if you see these, like I said, you're probably already screwed, but you might be able to find out how badly and when it occurred. So these are all great ones to look for. These will be updated. So if you're going to take a copy of this config, check back here every now and then for updates to these. And then here's a list of ransomware extensions as well that get used sometimes. So these are great to check out. Remember, these are all for file creations. So we're looking for any file that's been created with these extensions on them, essentially. Has anybody in the chat been through a cryptojacking or ransomware attack, either personally or professionally? How did that work out for you? Nice. Were you recoverable or did you full wipe and restore? Fair enough. You may have restored the same dropper that got you infected in the first place. I saw there was a story that came out of the UK the other day, and a company got crypto locked. They paid the ransom. They had cybersecurity incident insurance. They paid the deductible, paid their ransom, got their stuff unlocked. 3 weeks later, the attackers came back and locked them again and said, we literally can't believe that you didn't fix this. We told you how we got in as part of the agreement for us paying, I mean, you paying us. We told you how we got into the network and you didn't even bother to patch it. And it was like a straightforward patch. So we've locked you again just to like teach you a lesson. And so they had to go back and pay the deductible again. Their insurance actually paid up, and the guys got a second fee, released the key to them a second time, and hopefully they've learned their lesson now. But I don't know. That may be one of those three envelope situations. Yeah, I mean, I, I don't condone crypto locking. That is not what I'm gonna say. But some people only learn lessons the hard way, and so it's kind of one of those, yeah, free pen tests. Risk acceptance. Yeah, they've accepted the risk. It just cost them. When I was in the army, they used to tell us that we could be smart or we could be strong, because if we screwed up, we were going to have to do push-ups or run or whatever thing they decided to make us do. And so you could either be strong or smart. And I always tried my best to be strong or smart. I mean, I probably ended up being strong more often than I wanted to be. Um, Events 12, 13, and 14 are all kind of bundled up together. So they're all registry modifications. There's a lot of things that can happen with the registry, whether the registry is intentionally borked or whether settings are flipped on or off. If you're not familiar with the Windows registry is basically every setting for the computer, just to be dramatic. It's essentially where every setting's stored. So if you have a program that's going to store a set of settings somewhere that it needs to be able to access all the time and protect, hopefully, secure them, store them securely, so it can be read again later, then they're probably going to get put in the registry. So events 12, 13, and 14 deal with things being removed, things being deleted, values being reset, or objects being renamed. So I'm not going to dig into them. There's a ton of them in there. People much smarter than me went through and built this registry section. I'm so thankful that they did because I don't dig into the Windows registry a lot. And these guys took the time to go in and figure it out. So if you find anything there, please submit a pull request to the GitHub and let us know so we can update it and help make things better. 15 is going to be alternate data streams created. Not going to get into that one. There's some details there about NTFS data streams that you can read from Microsoft and from TechNet that'll kind of give you an explanation of what that means and why we're looking for it. There's also a note here that says some of the filters will make Sysmon think that the files are being written twice. And according to Mark Russinovich, which if you remember at the beginning, he's the guy who wrote the tool, he says it's not Sysmon's fault. Um, and since he's the CTO of Azure and he wrote the tool, I'm going to believe him. But I'd love to know whose fault it was so that it would stop adding it to my logs. 16 and 17. 16 is going to be if somebody changes the configuration for Sysmon. So it might be really relevant if you see an attacker get on a box and then they nuke your Sysmon config before they start working. You might want to at least know when and how they did that. So they do have a thing in there looking to see when that happens. 17 and 18 are when pipes are created or connected. Again, this is related to Cobalt Strike. If you're not familiar with Cobalt Strike, since Emotet went away, Cobalt Strike is the premier break into Windows machines tool. You can buy it. You can get a license for it. You can go and use it for nefarious purposes. Hopefully, if you're here listening tonight, you're using it for good things like pen tests. Um, but it's a dangerous tool, and there's a lot of arguments around whether or not it should even be for sale or whether or not it's right that they make it available. Coming from a security side, I think it's a great idea. I think that the bad guys are going to write these tools anyway. So the best we can do to have a tool that's off the shelf that makes it easy for script kiddies and skiddies, the easier it is for us to break down that tool, look at it, and protect against it. So if you're not familiar with Cobalt Strike, there's some documentation here for that as well. Let's see, we've got WMI Event Monitoring. Again, you can go ahead and read about that at length. 19, 20, and 21 are for different WMI events for different types of activities that are detected. There's no exclusions written right now, so everything that happens with WMI filters will get logged. Definitely start looking at your logs after you turn this on and see what's in there. 22 is going to be DNS queries. We've shut out a bunch of DNS queries to cut down on the logs, stuff that's normal that you expect to see. Do want to call your attention to one thing that's super important here. If you put, I'm going to put this in the chat, if I go and register a domain for hackmsn.com and you've put in your Sysmon config to block anytime msn.com shows up in a DNS query, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot. The reason why is that um, when you have a top level domain like .com and then you register a domain in front of it, what you're probably thinking is, oh, every subdomain that's related to that, like www dot, is going to be with my domain that I pay for and that I secure. So of course I could put in companyname.com and I would be fine. But if somebody goes in and registers like hackcompanyname.com and you're only looking for companyname.com, it's gonna get excluded from the logs. You're not gonna have any of that forensics data. So one of the cool tricks that you can do is put a dot in front of it, and you'll see that in several things in the config. .msn.com says, hey, I just want to look at this top level domain, which is .com, and then I just want to look at this specific domain that I have registered, which is MSN. And this example is msn.com. If you leave that dot off, you're gonna create problems for yourself. So pay attention when you're looking through these things. If you decide to modify them or screw with them, there's nothing that stops somebody from going out and registering your domain with other words in front of it. Um, so think about that when you're writing your rules here. The last few are file delete, clipboard event monitoring, and then process tampering. There's no rules in here right now. You can read through. There's reasons. Those are areas that they're developing in. You can turn certain things on. A lot of them say, hey, these are sandbox things. You really don't want to use them. If you do, you might knock your box over. So definitely don't put these in a production environment. So I'm going to stop for just a second because I need a breath. I'm going to get a drink. Does anybody have any questions so far? Or is this, has any of this been new information for anybody? And was any of it valuable so far? And if not, that's cool too. Just let us know so we can make it better next time. It's okay if it's bad. You can tell us. All right. I think you should just pull over and stop, man. Just go for it. I mean, if you're gonna wait on emergency services anyway, you might as well, hang out, learn something while you're at it, right? All right, cool. Well, let's keep going then. Let me jump back into the slides here. Um, OBS is just doing me dirty tonight. I do not know why it's jumping around like that, but we're gonna go with it for now. You guys can see the slides. Let me get a. Oh yeah. Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. I got some exercises in here. I was trying to keep this within 45 minutes to an hour. It's not looking like it's going to quite hit that. We're halfway through the slides, so I'm going to show you guys this. You're welcome to follow along on your own computer. If you want to get these tools, you can go to sysinternals.com. It's going to redirect you to a Microsoft domain where you can download the whole package, or again, you can go to live.sysinternals.com. I'm going to bring up the terminal here though, and I'm going to show you guys this first exercise. This is going to be how you install. This is going to be how you install Sysmon on your system, and I want to show you how fast and easy it is. We've set you up for success. There's no reason why you couldn't do this yourself. So let me get a terminal up here, and we are going to very quickly uninstall Sysmon. And you're gonna be like, Justin, why would you do that? And I'm gonna do that because I already have Sysmon installed on my box. And so I am running terminal as an administrator, and that's it. That's how you uninstall Sysmon. Installing Sysmon is almost as easy from inside the SysInternals Suite. I'm gonna run Sysmon. I'm running on a 64-bit system. Hope you are as well. I'm gonna give it a accept EULA here so that it doesn't prompt me with this stupid pop-up box all the time. And I'm going to give it an I for install. And then I'm going to give it the path to where I keep my Sysmon config that you guys saw a minute ago. So you can see there's my Sysmon config.xml. I'm going to hit enter. And drum roll. That's it. Sysmon's configured. So literally, takes you like 35 seconds. You go and download the Sysmon tool, you go and get the config, you put them together. It's going to install Sysmon as a service. And so once it says Sysmon started, that's it. You're recording events. We can see what we're recording if we pop open Event Viewer here. And so I have to forgive me. Let me get OBS to look at the Event Viewer real quick. It's not gonna let me do it. I apologize, guys. Well, it's in the logs there. You'll see says go to Application and Services, Microsoft Windows, Sysmon Operational. If you go into there, if you put everything in right, you grab the config that we offered you, you put everything in, you should see that you have logs there. Once you have those logs, you can filter them out based on any of those event IDs. You can filter them out on the contents of the logs, or you can just read through them like a crazy person. I've had it up and running for a few minutes, and I've got like uh, 200 or 300 events, right? Just from different things that have happened because of the config that we're using. So remember, go and take a look at those, figure out what works in your environment, what doesn't work, and then parse out what you need and what you don't need. And that's how you install Sysmon. Live demos never work. If you're wondering if you should do a live demo, the answer is always no. You should never do a live demo because it's never going to work like you want it to. Like when you try and run Event Viewer and show off your Sysmon config, but it works if you use what we sent you. So let's talk about Procmon. Procmon uses all the things that Sysmon uses, but it does it live on the fly, and it shows it all on the screen. It's just you're gonna turn on Procmon and it's gonna go and just start filling the screen full of crap that it is looking for, right? All those things that Sysmon's reporting on, Procmon's going to be able to report on. The difference is Sysmon is a persistent install. You install Sysmon, every time the system boots, it's going to pull its config file, it's going to look at what it expects to look for, and then it's going to log those things into your security log. On the other hand, Procmon is only going to work when you turn it on and tell it to start capturing events. And it does something really cool. It writes all the events because it needs to write really, really quickly to capture all that data. I'll show you guys what I mean in just a second. It's going to have to write really, really fast to capture all that data. So it writes it all into memory. And you can change that. I'll show you guys how. But it writes it all into memory so that it can collect it all as fast as possible. And then you can go in and start applying filters. And as you apply those filters, then it starts masking out part of the data that you're seeing there, right? But it's non-destructive filtering. So anytime you turn off a filter or change a filter or anything, it'll let you see back all of those events that you've captured again. I put in the notes or in the slides that it's overwhelming and immediate insight into kernel level system calls. The reason I say that is because when we turn on Procmon in a minute, it's going to collect something like tens of thousands of events a second. It's going to hook into the kernel and it's going to look at every single thing that the kernel is doing and provide some kind of log for it. So this is a great way to use to gather forensics on something. It's also a great way to do troubleshooting, but it's also a good way to knock over a system if you launch Procmon and you don't stop the capture because it starts capturing as soon as it's launched. You don't stop the capture, then it will just run away with the memory until it knocks the system over. There's a way to get around that. I'm going to show you guys in just a second. And I want to give another shout out to AD Bertram on GitHub, or Adam the Automator is his adamtheautomator.com. You can go to adamtheautomator.com/Procmon. He has an exhaustive series that I've borrowed heavily from for this, where he shows all the different cool things that you can do with Procmon. So let's take a look at it. There's a few gotchas that you need to know. If you just turn on Procmon, if you just double click it and let it launch, it's going to start capturing everything. Um, everything. Everything. It's going to eat up as much memory as it can, as quickly as it can, as it tries to start. If you want to, though, you can launch it from the command line using the no connect flag, and the no connect flag will actually stop it from capturing anything on boot. Or as soon as you boot up, you can hit Control E, which is the hotkey for starting and stopping captures, and that'll start or stop the capture for you so that you can stop it. Also, if you're missing any events at any time, you can always hit Control L and remove any filters. I'll show you all the filters in just a minute, but those are just some things. If you're thinking back later and you're like, man, I'm not getting any events and I don't understand what's happening, it's possible that you put a filter in that's nonsensical or that only looks for like a very specific thing, and that event may just not be occurring at the time. So it's always great to go in and clear out your filters in there. And then if you launch it and it's knocking over the system because the system didn't have a lot of memory, and it's always filling up the memory cache really quickly, then you can reference back to these and say, hey, I remember Justin told me that it could knock over older machines. There was a way to stop it from doing that. It's the no connect flag. So come back and reference your slides here. All right, so I'm going to do a Procmon capture for you guys. I already have Procmon up, so I'm going to cheat, but I've brought Procmon up with the no connect option, so that it does come up without. Don't you do this to me, OBS. There we go. Can you guys see my Procmon screen? Shrink it a little bit. There we go. Say when. Good now? All right, cool. That's all that matters. I do this for you, man. This for you. By the way, put some money in my Twitch bucket. I'll show you my toes. That's on the recording now. That's unfortunate. Anyway, so you can put Procmon, you can launch Procmon with that no connect flag, and if you do launch it with the no connect flag, it's going to bring you here to just this blank box, this blank window. And I'm going to show you guys what happens if you just hit Control E to start capturing. This is what you're going to get, and I'm going to count to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There you go. We're looking at right now, based on the current filter, my device caught 90,000 events in the 5 or 6 seconds that we were doing that capture. So you can see why right off the bat, I might not want to collect all that data. You can also see why if you were trying to troubleshoot something and figure out what's going on in a system, or figure out what a piece of malware does or a virus that's got on a system, if you're running this in a clean environment or in a virtual machine, you can see why this thing would give you a ton of insight. It's also great for forensics because then you can export these and say, hey, I ran this or I was running this and I did this and I can prove that X happens when Y happens. And it gets really crazy because you can do things like use the process tree, which we're not going to get into tonight, but I'll turn it on for just a second if it won't knock my system over. You can pull up the process tree, and OBS isn't picking up the window. But anyway, you can pull up the process tree and it'll show you how each of these events are chained together. And if you guys know, I know some of you guys know John Guthrie, he's a friend of ours, got a lot of us into this mess that we call InfoSec. Um, I remember going into his office one day and he had something that looked like one of these Procmon reports that was in process tree mode. And this breach system had like 55 instances of service host. And if you've ever opened a task manager and seen like 55 instances of service host, you know something's bad. You're not sure what, but you know something's wrong. And he had these sheets of paper printed out, and it was just process trees, and it was all the different service hosts. And next to some of them was like the print spooler or like memory handler or whatever, and that other one was like malware question mark. Because this thing will allow you to take and explode out just in a few seconds everything that happened on the system. And that's what they were doing, was going through and looking, trying to figure out what was managing all these different service hosts. So just because you see a bunch of service hosts in here doesn't mean that you have some kind of malware. That just means that this version of service hosts that has this PID was doing something in here. But let's see about slimming this down. So there's a bunch of different operations here in the operations column that we can look through. And they have little icons next to them. Some of them are going to have something that looks like a filing cabinet with a magnifying glass. Some of them are going to have a little blue thing that I've never been able to discern what it is, but it means network. It may be like the little network triangle that's used when they're talking about the OSI layer sometimes. There is the process and thread activity, there's profiling events, and then there's registry events. And you can turn any of these off if you want to. So if you know that you're not worried about networking events right now, like whatever we're looking for, I don't care about networking events, you can come up here and click the Show Network Activity button and actually turn off all the network activity. So that dropped us from looking at 90,000 events down to 73,000 events. Turn them back on. Or you can come here in the operation field and you can right click on these and it'll give you this awesome little drop down menu. And you can say, actually, I want to exclude anytime I see this event. So like anytime I see a read file operation, I don't care about it because I'm not looking for something reading something on my system. Maybe I'm only looking for what's writing to my system, right? So I want to exclude all of the read file operations. And that drops me down to only 32,000 events. So now I'm getting somewhere. I'm also not concerned about the registry. I'm not concerned about network activity. So now I just have times when something created a file on my account or on my system maybe. And so taking a look at that, I can come in and do something like include, include in my filter this operation that I've clicked on, which is to create files. So I'm going to include this one, and I'm going to say only show me things where my system created a file during that time period. And you're gonna be like, wow, there's 308 files that were created in the like 5 or 6 seconds that I captured those events all across my system. And it tells you some of them are just tries. There's a results column here. It'll tell you if it tried to write it or if it couldn't write it, or all these different things. But what you start being able to do by piling on these filters is you start being able to take that 90,000 events that you just got while you were trying to troubleshoot and pare them down. Now we're under 308. I can probably start knocking out things and say, hey, I don't actually care what service host was doing, so let's go ahead and exclude every time that the process name was service host. Well, great, now I'm only down to 230. And you start paring these down. And you're like, man, that's a crazy amount of work. We're going to have to carve these up, and there's going to be all this noise from the Windows machine that I'm going to see all the time. And like, this is kind of starting to sound like a pain in the ass, right? But there's a fix for that. So, does anybody remember how to clear the filters? Audience participation time. This isn't a trick. I don't remember how to clear the filter. No, I'm kidding. You can go up here to filter and click on reset filter. And if you click reset filter or control R, it's going to wipe out all those filters that you just applied, and it's going to put you back to the original number. That's why we said that Procmon is non-destructive, because even though we're filtering out stuff, we're not losing anything from the forensic record. We're just hiding or masking some things. Um, and then there's another thing I wanted to show you guys. It's called backing files. Let me see if I can get this thing to play nice. When you go here under backing files, somebody in the chat, can you guys see that box that popped up? Okay, cool. In the backing files, it tells you that it's using a page file. It tells you how much space it's taking up. So I'm taking up roughly right over 37. Da, da, da. I have 37 megs available, it looks like. It tells me all kinds of information. And it says it's using my virtual memory. Well, the machine that I'm running off of today, I got 32 gigs of memory in here. I can hold a bunch of junk. Even with all these Edge tabs open, I can still hold a bunch of junk um, in memory. But I may not want to do that, right? For whatever reason, I may only have a little limited amount of memory available. I may have an SSD available to me or something like that. You can use the file named section here, and you can actually choose this and then put in the name of a file that you want to write to somewhere, right? I wouldn't recommend putting this across a file share unless you have gigabit connections on a SAN or something like that. You probably don't want to try and write these files across the network. There's a good chance you're going to corrupt them or lose them. Um, and there's also a good chance that whoever manages the SAN is going to come hit you in the head with a brick if you start writing 90,000 events across the network. But if you're on a limited memory system, you do have options here. And this again is in the slides. So if you're like, this is way too much information, I'm missing this, I'm not getting everything, you'll have the slides at the end. So you can always come back here and look at this again. So let's jump back to the slides for a second. So that was how to capture. We also talked about how to filter, but I'm going to show you guys a little more about how to filter. I showed you how to filter by right-clicking on things and using include and exclude events. There's some other really neat things that you can do here when you right-click on something. Has it not been showing you guys my right-clicks? When I do a right-click, can you guys see the context of the right-click menu? Okay, great. So let me just tell you, I'm going to grab a screenshot here and let me open up this screenshot and I'll just show it to you guys. Cool OBS. I was bragging before this all started. I was like, man, OBS is so smart. It can do like so many things. And then I didn't realize that it was going to behave this way. You can't see the screenshot either. Still me dirty. I'll provide you guys a screenshot. I'll put something in the slides and update them after tonight. But basically, when you right click on something, it's going to give you a couple of different options to modify the filter. It's going to give you exclude events before the event that we're looking at. It's going to exclude events after the event that we're looking at. It's going to allow you to include and then let you pick any of a number of columns that you can choose and turn on inside of Procmon. Procmon has a ton of columns that are hidden that you can enable. One of those is like architecture. So if you want to know if it's a 32-bit, 64-bit, whatever, the command line that was ran for it, the image path, process name, the event class, the result as to whether or not it was successful or failed. So you could look if your app wasn't working, you could come in and say, hey, I want to see every event where the result is that there was a failure. You can do all those kinds of things. And then the same thing for exclusions and for highlight. So there's an option to do a highlight where you can say, I want to highlight every option where this occurs. I want to take this event, and every time this event occurred, I want to see it lit up on the screen. I want them enumerated. You can sort by those highlightings. You can export those highlightings. There's all kinds of cool stuff you can do if OBS isn't doing you dirty. So let's see if we can get the filter dialog to load so that you guys can see it here. Can you guys see my filter dialog? Awesome. Okay, so here in the filter dialog, this is every filter that currently exists. So an X means it's being excluded. Green check mark means it's being included. One of the things that they've done is Procmon comes with a default set of filters that you can turn off. I would not recommend doing it. If you turn off the filters, you might again knock over the system with the sheer volume of stuff you're going to collect. Also, you don't want to catch, or you don't want to start catching anything that's writing to the page file, because Procmon's writing to the page file. So if you begin collecting every event that was going to the page file, you begin to collect a duplicate number of exponential events and your computer would fall over. It also stops any of the stuff that it does, so it's masking its own behavior and anything that's running as system. So you may find reason to go in and modify these if you need to. Just remember, if you ever mess them up, you can always hit the reset button. And even if you delete all of these, you can hit reset and it'll put these back in here. There's a lot of cool things you can throw in here. You can say operation. Operation is one of my favorite ones. I like to go in and look at operation and say, is the operation one of these things that I'm looking for? So one of them that's always interesting is write to a file. So I can go in and say the operation is a file write. Click the add. You'll see it gets added to the top here as one of the filters. I can click apply. And then if I go back and look over here in the background, I'll notice that my list of events is updated. I've now went to 35 events instead of 90,000 events. And so during that period of that capture, 35 files were written for some reason, right? So if I'm finding stuff on my device that I didn't put there or I don't remember being responsible for, I can go back and find those. This can also be great back in the day. Not that I would have ever done this, but I heard rumors that once upon a time people used to go in and run Procmon while they were booting up a piece of software that had a license file that it would check for, and they would look for a read file that failed because they didn't have a license for the software, and then they knew what files they were looking for and then could find those files on legitimate systems, mirror those files, and then get copies and eventually end up cracking them. That's the thing with these tools. These tools are agnostic, right? They're just as good or as bad as the actions that you take with them, which is why, again, I recommend using Sysmon to put in alerts for when you see these tools being ran on your systems, right? So that's how we get a filter. Remember, if we mess up a filter, we mess up our stuff, we can always hit reset and hit apply, and that'll give us back all of our events so that we don't actually lose everything. Okay, anybody think of any reason why um, specifically, I know I've mentioned a few, but can anybody see any reasons why they would use this in their like day-to-day life? Is there any part of your job troubleshooting or doing anything with Windows endpoints where you could be like, oh, I could see how this might be helpful to me right now, even though it's a lot to take in? No? Okay. Well, you guys are still hanging out here, so I'm gonna assume that you're getting some value from it. All the things that I showed you that you can do with file writes, you can also do with registry writes. You can also do with network connections. So if somebody calls in and says, "Hey, my app's not working," You could set up a network filter and start capturing all these events that way as well. Uh, let's see if the configurations will appear when I do the configurations. Yeah, you guys can see those. Cool. So one of the cool things you can do is you can also go up into File and do an export on Procmon, and you can do export configuration. And if you do an export configuration, all the different filters that you've built and put together, you can export those and save them just as they are. So if maybe you want to check a machine, you know that if a machine gets infected, it sees these very specific things. And you could build a filter that showed those very specific things, and post it online and distribute it to your buddies and say, hey guys, you might want to check and run Procmon on your box, because if you see this activity happening, you know, you've definitely been breached. You've definitely got the gonorrhea of whatever the latest cryptojacker is. So there's a great way to export those. You also just export them for yourself so that you can say, hey, I know my app does this. I know the app image ID is going to be this. I know it's expected to run like this. And I need to look for this certain activity to occur. So I'm going to go ahead and build myself a configuration. I'm going to export that configuration, and then the next time I need to assess somebody's box because I get a support ticket or something, I can go ahead and grab that configuration that I've already got pre-built for this event, pop it up, run it, and then start my capture. Look for it to happen. That way you don't have to go through and clear out all the events that you're not interested in every time. Just like you can export them, you can import them. And again, that's in the slides. You can see everything there. Um, you can also export events in Procmon. So you can highlight as many of these events. You could take and highlight everything that you had captured, all 90,000 plus events, and say, hey, I've got all these 90,000 events. Now I want to save them to disk or do something with them because they're still held in memory. And if you go in to do an export, uh, you go in and hit File Save. And that's a little, I think it's a little goofy because you wouldn't think that you were going to hit File Save. You would think that you would do like export or something. But in reality, you're saving a set of the saving a set of events here. Come on, you gonna be goofy again? So let me show you guys this. And I know you guys can see it this time, so I'm not gonna ask you because I can see in OBS where you guys see it now. There's three different ways to export events. You can do all events, which is literally going to be everything you captured. But remember, we just did a 5-second capture and we got 100,000 events. So a several minutes long capture may get you up into the millions of events. You probably don't want to export all the events. There may be a reason for forensics, chain of evidence, establishing admissible evidence of why you want to export everything. And if that's the case, know your use cases, know why you would need to be doing that, and then act accordingly, right? But for the most part, you probably don't want to do all events. If you're going to do all events, I would highly recommend that you export all the events and then also export a configuration file. That way, once you open this file later, you can then take that configuration file that shows the meat of what you actually want and bring that back in. If for some reason you had to share this for legal reasons and you were trying to create evidence and you were trying to make it admissible, this would be the preferred way to try and do this, because that way you're going to have all the events from the box, and then you're going to be able to give them a filter and say this is specifically what I'm referring to or specifically what we're looking for. This shows whatever we're trying to assert or prove or establish, right? Otherwise, you probably want to use the selected events. And so selected events is great when you want to share with other people or show something where a chain of evidence isn't necessary, but you still want to get the most of the story. And that'll allow you to do any events displayed using the current filter. So if you filter out 10,000 events down to 2 events and you save it, it's just going to be those 2 events. Everything else is going to be lost. This is the only time in Procmon where you can lose content, right? Where we're going to do something that's destructive. If you save highlighted events or you save events displayed using the current filter, you're going to lose anything that wasn't on the screen at that time or wasn't highlighted at that time. And then highlighted events is kind of goofy. You can go through and control click if you want to, or you can use that right click context menu and do highlight events and give it some criteria to highlight by, some filter to highlight by, and then do highlighted events that way. I rarely use that one, but you could use it if you just needed to get a few key pieces of information. I usually try and parse mine down so that my configuration gives me exactly what I'm looking for, so there's a clear picture with not a lot of nuance in my path or in my trail when I'm looking there. And then there's three different file types you can use. One's PML. This is the native Procmon format. It's going to retain all of the data. So if you drop a PML, you're not going to lose anything. It's going to get every single thing that Procmon saw the first time around. It's going to bring it back in exactly as it was seen the first time. But PML files aren't very accessible for other things, like if you wanted to put it into some kind of logging thing and sort it around and move it around and visualize the data and those kind of things. So Procmon may not be the best unless you're trying to share Procmon files with somebody else who's going to be looking at them in Procmon. In that case, they offer two. They've got CSV, which is the comma separated value file, can literally be opened with anything. Notepad will open it, WordPad, Word, Google Docs, Excel, Open Office Calculator, whatever. CSV will be open, can be opened by anything. And then XML. XML will actually allow you to get a bunch of stack trace information. If you're familiar with stack trace, I'm not going to go into it in this discussion tonight, but if you're familiar with stack traces and you want to preserve that information and you don't want to use a PML, you can use XML, and there are other utilities and tools that can ingest this XML and do something with it where that trace data may be relevant or useful. And this is just an exercise if you're following along at home. Select some events, however you want to select them. Do a bunch of control clicks, do a highlight, whatever you want to do. Click save it however you want to, and now you can send it off and share it with others. But remember, saving is the only destructive activity that you can do in Procmon. If you save it, depending on how you save it, you're going to lose anything that you didn't choose to export. And the next, this is my favorite. So we have a ton of crap that we've caught that is probably irrelevant, right? And so and I actually say, I just said that saving was the only destructive filtering option. That's actually wrong. My notes are wrong here, so shame on me. Somebody submit a pull request correcting this slide. There are actually two ways that you can destroy data in Procmon. One is to save the data with filters on it in a way in which you ignore parts of the data, right? What we just talked about at length. The other is that you can start a capture with a filter applied, and if you start a capture with certain filters applied, then it doesn't record any of the other data. It still rotates the counter and shows that the other events were encountered, but it drops them right off. So I'm going to show you guys that really quickly. You can go up here, and if you know you don't need any of the things that you currently have, um, you can come up here and hit this clear button, and it'll actually clear out all the logs. So you'll lose everything. So that is destructive, but it's obviously destructive. Um, and you can come in here and set a filter. So I'm going to set a filter, and I'm going to go ahead and say, give me a filter. And again, I like using operations. So I'm going to say, give me a filter where the operation is a write file, and you can fill these in, or you can hit the drop down box. You'll start to know them over time, start to figure out which ones are useful. And I'm going to add this in. I'm going to hit apply, and I'm going to hit OK. But I didn't start actually capturing yet, right? Nothing's showing up, and the capture is not running. I'm then going to go into the filter drop down, which is not allowing you guys to see for some reason. And when you hit the filter drop down, there's an option for drop filtered events. And if you hit that checkbox and you mark it as drop filtered events, then as those events come in, if they're not a write file, which is the filter that I applied, they're going to be dropped. And I'm going to lose my forensics data. I'm going to lose all of my chain of evidence and everything that I might need to make this admissible. But this is great for troubleshooting because now I'm not filling memory full of crap because I know that I'm just looking for this certain thing. So I'm going to start a capture real quick, count to 5 again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm going to stop my capture again. Stop the capture. It encountered in that 5-second period with that filter applied, it encountered 8,300 events and 43 of them made it through our filter. So this is a great way. I've taken up very minimal memory resources. I haven't written anything to disk yet, and I've discarded 8,000 events, 8,200 events that I didn't need that weren't useful to me based on the filter. So if I'm only looking at a single process, I'm only looking at a single user, I'm only looking at a single file location, those kind of things, these kind of destructive filter captures can be super useful for just doing like your normal troubleshooting. Uh, and I have in here this isn't recommended for troubleshooting. That's supposed to be the other way. It is recommended for troubleshooting. It's not recommended for forensics and evidence collection. Another time when this is super useful is if you wanted to do a really long capture. So if you wanted to capture for like let's say 8 hours. Let's say you wanted to set something up on a server and you said, well, we've got something weird going on to the server. We got some weird hiccups. And we know that this is happening. We know that it's hitting a BSOD after it accesses this file, but we can't get a dump off of it. And we don't know why when it touches that file. We don't know what's touching the file. We don't know what the file's doing. We don't know what it tries to do after it tries to get the file. But anytime it tries to get this file, it falls over. In that case, you could set one of these up where you were writing to disk so that you're not losing things if the box falls over. You're writing to disk instead of into memory. And you could put in these filters and say, I just want to watch this one file. If anything touches this file, I need to know about it, right? And I want to catch the parent process, and I want to catch this, and I want to catch this. You can do that. Procmon can run for long periods of time if you build these filters right for yourself up front so that you're not just capturing tons of like nonsensical data. And then that's it, guys. That's the end. I've got some sources in here that I really think you guys should check out. I've plugged Adam's page several times throughout the evening. Really think you should go and check out his stuff. He goes into a lot more depth if you want to get into those traces. If you want to get into some really great real world examples, he gives some real world examples of where he uses this on the regular and the configurations that he uses for this. You can find him on Twitter. You can find him at AD Bertram. You can find Swift on Security, who's responsible for the Sysmon configuration that we started with, and then of course there's a link to the open source and Creative Commons photos that we used in the slideshow tonight. I really appreciate you guys coming out and giving me your time, giving me your feedback, giving me your attention, and I hope that you guys enjoyed it. I am going to again put these links in the chat so that you guys can get to them. You can find me on Twitter at IAin'tShootin'. That's IAin'tShootin'. You can also find me on GitHub and find all the information for this class. And so I'll leave that page up for a second here, and then I'll take Q&A. Any questions or anything that you guys saw that you want to know more about, or that I didn't cover as effectively as you guys would like? There's one question in the chat. Lucas had asked if we were going to update the config tonight. Um, Not sure exactly what he's referring to. I know he means the Sysmon config. Um, I think he means like show you guys how to update it. I'm not. If you guys have questions about the Sysmon config, if you go and get my copy off of my page and are trying to figure out how to use it and you're not really sure what's going on, just hit me up. Either send a pull request or message me on Twitter is a great way to get a hold of me, and just say, hey, I pulled down your Sysmon config. I don't understand what the heck's going on. I'm not really sure. I saw you use it, but I don't know. And I'm getting tons of logs and it's all broken and I'm freaking out. Just hit me up and we'll get it taken care of. The ODP file is going to be the PowerPoint file. The PDF is going to be the slide, like a PDF copy of the slides that I was working on tonight. And then the Sysmon config file is in its own repo, and it's going to be the Sysmon config. So if you go to github.com/IAin'tShootin', click on my repositories, you'll see both of those, the training. Feel free, I said at the beginning, this is published under a license of I don't care what you do, please use it. Take this class, go and teach your peers how to use this, even if it's one-on-one. Sit down with them, send them this recording tonight. I'll have it up online in a little bit. Or, gather up some of your peers and actually give the class. Sit down with them and say, hey, you know what, for the next hour, we're going to talk about Sysmon and how maybe we can use this to keep, ourselves safe and our business safe. So I guarantee you your bosses won't be mad about it. If you knock over the file server by doing procmon writes to the file server, you might get a slap on the hand or hit in the head with a brick, maybe. Depends. But best of luck to you guys. Again, I appreciate you guys coming out. Any questions? Any additional questions, rather? Yeah, no worries. I'm glad to do it. I hope you get a lot of good use out of it. Um, if not, blame Mark Russinovich. All right. Who is that? Is that Steven? Oh, hey man. Welcome. I'm glad you got to see it. Were you the one driving in the rain who was dying? Oh, it was you, Nick. Okay. It kept saying fellow Jitster, and I was like, I'm not gonna try and guess who this Jitster is. But I knew I didn't know your voice, so I gotcha.